Understanding China is incredibly complex. Our cultures are very different, and when cultures are different, ultimately it's very difficult to establish that trust. In today's video, we're going to be attempting to answer that question. How can we build trust between Western countries and China? To help me tell that story, I'm inviting in Pascal Coppens. Pascal is a tech entrepreneur who has been traveling and doing business in China for over 30 years. Pascal is the author of 2 must-read books on China, and in today's episode, we're going to be specifically talking about what steps Western countries and China can go through to help build a better relationship for the future of our world. If you haven't already seen part 1 of this interview, make sure that you start there by clicking down on the link down below. In addition, today's video is proudly sponsored by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Let's move into the next section, which is called the dual perspective. And I thought this was quite interesting. You broke down some of the very common things that we hear about in China, and then you basically offered, this is the Western lens, and then here's the Chinese lens. And this is the 2 different perspectives on that. What I'm going to do is basically just mention them, and I'm going to allow you to explain that a little bit further from your perspective. In the West, we believe that China steals, it copies, it spies. But you've highlighted from the Chinese lens is that they believe that the West has China in a straitjacket. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. And so to go back onto those different views, I call that the Chinese lens and the Western lens. Right. This was done in the beginning of my book explicitly to polarize. But my book is not about polarizing. My book is really about the opposite. Right. But I wanted to do that because I do believe that many people who look at China and maybe distrust China, they don't know the Chinese view. Right. And I think it was important to mention at least this Chinese view. That doesn't mean you have to agree with the Chinese view. But when it comes to the first one, I mean, this is very much because I've come from a background of electronics engineering and software and so on. And so everything about stealing and spying, I mean, I've been part of that Chinese society, so I know it very often. But on the other hand, what many Chinese, definitely 20, 30 years ago, they felt very much that the whole Western intellectual property system was actually built primarily to support or protect the Western IP. And China, as long as they couldn't build their own IP, was actually having to buy expensive like medicine or expensive electronics. I mean, I've sold some of them, so I know they paid thousands of dollars in really expensive stuff that they couldn't really afford, but they had to do it. And so they had to make really hard choices to buy these things that they needed. But on the other hand, the society, the government, the company, the country was not ready, wasn't rich enough to buy these things. Right. And so they felt that the West was keeping them in a straitjacket, meaning that you can have all this, but you're going to pay full price of this. And many Chinese have thought of this that way. Of course, today it's a very different situation because they're building a lot of innovation, and Huawei doesn't need to steal. They can just build 6G without anybody else because they're the first one to the market. So today they are recognizing the value of creations and intellectual property and all these things as well. But from a Chinese point of view, when you're very, weak and poor as a country, which they were very much 30 years ago, and still many people are, then it doesn't feel fair to have to pay full price for things that would be good for the whole population. And so this is why sometimes they justified stealing and spying, because they thought this is the only way for us to move as a society. Otherwise, we're always going to be held back. And so that is a view which I think is important to know. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, but it's important to know.
Oh, that's a really good one. I like your perspective on that. And let's go to the next one. It is China is a control state without freedom. But for many Chinese, the Chinese lens is that the Chinese feel just as free as Westerners.
Yes. This is something that, and I think you made a video about freedom as well, just not too long ago. So I've watched that with lots of interest. So I do believe the reality is that we in the West believe that Chinese are not free. Right. But what we fail to see is that if you go back again in time 30 years ago, most of the freedoms that we had for granted in the 90s weren't available in China. I have a long list of freedoms that we had that was very normal, that was not available then, which are today. Correct. And so if you've lived in China for a long time, what you feel is that China has become more and more free every year. And so they feel they're gaining freedom. Of course, in Hong Kong, it's a very different story. I've put that in my book as well. But for most people in mainland, they feel that actually they've been liberated more towards freedom and not being contained as much as we believe they are. And so I do believe that they're much more free for the simple reason that they actually feel liberated in a way, but also because they're more used to live in a society where there's more regulations and rules, because that's been like that when the Confucianism for 2,500 years. So it's not so special for them. And if you've been in China, I mean, you don't feel as controlled as the media makes you believe. I mean, it's, of course, there are limitations, and the lockdowns is very clear that there's challenges. But I mean, I've lived long enough in China to not feel that control as we think. And so for Chinese, it's already a huge improvement from the past, and they still believe every year it's getting better very often. So from that perspective, I think, we're missing some of that context.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've made a few videos on freedom in China. And I do think that one of the things that I personally believe in is that freedom means different things to different people. And, you know, a lot of, the classic example that I give is, I mean, you can even look at it with the gun crime in America. You know, that is a very big freedom for Americans to have possessions of firearms. But speaking with many Chinese, you know, they don't really look at that as a freedom. You know, I mean,
even Europeans don't get that.
And Europeans don't get that either,
no,
right?
so it's not just Chinese.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is, unfortunately, that is a uniquely American problem that we have. We're the only country in the world that has these, mass shootings and have this problem. But you know, the interesting paradox there is that most Americans prefer that. And that is, that is a cultural difference. So you're right, that not even just a Chinese versus America thing. It is really a America versus the world on that particular issue. Let's talk about something that's really important. And this is, of course, China's leader, Xi Jinping. In the Western lens, you know, we would call him, or, you know, certainly label him as the new dictator, Xi Jinping. However, from the Chinese perspective, the Chinese lens is he is the right leader for China. Elaborate on that.
Well, the right leader, what is right, what is wrong, is of course a different question. But in my book, I've explained that for many Chinese, I mean, Xi Jinping shows or demonstrates that China is actually ready to play a role on the world stage and get back to where they were before 1840, when basically the Opium War happened. And so they lost a lot, and that was that century of humiliation. And what is it? No, century of humiliation. So sorry, my English. Sure. So it was a century of humiliation, and so this is basically where China now feels that they're back on track, and Xi Jinping is helping to make them feel proud, and we're always looking at that dictator from a pretty negative point of view. What we're missing is that actually, when we think from a Western point of view, like from Europeans, we think about dictators. We don't think about dictators to actually alleviate hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, to give people high-speed trains, I mean, we don't think of it as something good and evolutionary. And we often look at dictators as controlling and wanting to take power and keeping people down. But most people actually don't feel in China that the dictatorship is actually keeping them down, but actually giving them opportunity. And so there's the word dictatorship or dictator is actually a word that doesn't fit in what we understand as what a dictator is in the West. And so I think that's why many people see him as a good leader, although he has lots and lots of power, as long as they feel that for the country, this is beneficial, and specifically for the pride of the country and the feeling. And that goes back to that first circle of me. I mean, do I trust myself? Well, you can only trust yourself if you have the basic needs and everything you need, and you can actually go into a higher level of doing things that is great for humanity and so on. You need that. And as long as more people get that, they feel that he's actually a good leader for China. I mean, I don't think Xi Jinping would be a good leader for other countries, but for the Chinese context, he's actually a good leader and for many people. And I think that's something they trust, that this will improve their lives. And of course, like with every leader in the world, it's never 100%. So there's always people that are thinking differently. But I do believe that he is more of a good leader to more people than most leaders in the world are to most people in that same country they are in.
Yeah, that's a good, very, very good perspective.
Pascal, I want to move on to a very big topic, and that is
Mhm.
human rights.
Yeah,
It's a
sure.
very, very key, very hot topic, certainly surrounding China and many countries around the world. You wrote in here, I'm going to read this paragraph, is very good. When we hear loaded words about China like unfree, police state, repressive, communism, forced labor, concentration camps, or dictator, we're hit by as strong emotions that translate directly into hostility. To increase trust in China, we must try to let go of the emotional impressions and open our minds to a more nuanced and colorful world. Now, going back to that dual perspective, the Western lens is always China violates human rights. But on the flip side, I think there's kind of a stalemate here, because in China, they would also have that the Chinese lens is that the West violates human rights. So let's
Right.
talk about this and break that down a little further.
Yeah. So I think the whole story here for me is, if I've experienced it so far, is, I mean, first of all, the human rights topic is a very loaded, very sensitive topic, which in many ways it's become impossible to have a debate, because whatever you say good or bad about China, you're being put in one camp or the other.
Right.
And so I think the challenges with human rights in China is more that we're being labeled as being either pro China or pro Beijing, or we're being labeled as being pro Western and imperialist. And so
Right.
either is actually a negative view. And
Right.
so I think the problem is that we're looking at this human rights perspective when we look at China using very, very loaded words that give us the emotions that we used to have of the worst times in our history that we never want to go back again.
Right.
And that makes total sense. The difference is, in my view, is that our history doesn't per se reflect China's history. And so we shouldn't use our history as a reason to say this is how China will evolve. But when you look at the Chinese side, they feel that we are often saying things about human rights, which, whether we're right or wrong, I leave that in the middle, but we're saying things. But then we are doing things sometimes which also isn't very, very good from our side. And so from a Chinese perspective, specifically when it's about the collective, I mean, look at how we dealt with the virus, COVID-19. Many Chinese will say, well, this is a violation of human rights. Whether we agree or not is a different story, but 1 million people died in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say this is my position, but this is a position of many Chinese people, that they say, yeah, how can you let that happen? Right. You could have done differently. Of course, then we say, yeah, but we're not going to have lockdowns because we're in a non-free state and dictatorship and so on. So I'm not saying the Chinese solution is the solution. What I'm saying is that for many Chinese, we're blaming China for doing certain things, but we are doing certain things as well that they feel is a violation of maybe collective human rights.
Correct.
And this could go on many things. The way that we've dealt with the Southern Hemisphere, and maybe, I mean, if I look at the European side, how immigrants have not been treated very well often in our areas. I mean, so there's many things, and they compare often these things. So I think it's not about black and white and who's right and who's wrong. It's just that the Chinese, many Chinese feel that while we're talking about it, we're not always doing it ourselves very well. And so we shouldn't put that moral high always and tell others how they should behave if we can't do it ourselves. And so this is where I do believe that Chinese might be more self-aware of the human rights problems and solutions than we think they are.
Right.
Which doesn't mean that the solution is there imminently or directly, but it's the awareness is much higher, I think, than we believe it is. And so I've put that Chinese side on to show a few examples of how the Chinese think about what we're doing, good and bad, on human rights. But it's a very loaded topic, and I've explained many of these topics in my book on the Uyghurs and Hong Kong and all these things, to go more in detail and more nuanced, like I wrote. So because every coin has two sides, and that doesn't mean that we need to agree with one side or the other side, or agree with both, but knowing both is interesting because that opens the debate. And when it comes to human rights, I think the debate is missing the things that China is trying to do to improve it, and that's what we need.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I think that's something, speaking as an American and looking at the way that we typically go about things, is that we tend to always offer the American perspective, and this is how we see the world in our view. For example, I mean, I'm living in Canada right now, and when, for example, our Secretary of State comes out and says, the best policy for the world is an American first policy. Our neighbors to the north, you should be thinking America first. And I say, well, in Canada, we should be thinking Canada first, right? I mean, we shouldn't be putting America's priorities over our own priorities, but we need to think of, all right, let's think about Canada and how does that work come in, how does that perspective? Because even between, these two countries, Canada and America, we're closest trading partners. We're very much like brothers or cousins. We're very close as far as countries can be, but yet there is a lot of nuance and a lot of differences. And what is going to be very important for Americans is not necessarily going to be the same importance for Canadians. Now, when you're dealing with a country like Canada and US that are culturally almost identical, you still need that nuance between the two. Now, imagine you go to China and you go to a country that is nowhere close to being, culturally the same. Again, that is a very important point that you brought up. I love the idea, there is two sides to every coin. We need to understand both perspectives. So yes, as Americans, we can come and bring our side and our perspective to the table, but we also need to respect China and say, all right, let's listen to your side and your perspective. And I think that's where we're trying to get is a dialogue. We need to get more dialogue between the two. We need to have, a bit of an understanding of both sides. And I think that's really for everybody, right? When Europe deals with China, they need to bring the European perspective. China needs to bring theirs. And we need to look at where we can establish the common ground. And I thought you answered that very good, though. That's a very, very good perspective about human rights.
Yeah. And I actually did a comparison in my book about Belgium and Holland, the Netherlands, which is similar, I think, to the US and Canada. So we have the same problem. We have the same language, but we're so different.
Yes.
But we figured out that we need to understand the other perspective. Otherwise, we can't trade with each other. And we're also the biggest trading partners. Right. So it's the same situation. So I've written that part in my book as well, because I do believe if we can figure it out, because we have to figure it out because we're neighbors. But now this world, everybody's a neighbor because we're in a global world. And so we have to figure it out with China as well and with other countries, and specifically in Asia, which is growing as a whole area. We need to figure it out. What do they think?
Yes, absolutely. Pascal, I want to bring up another good perspective here that you wrote in the book. The West does not trust China, while the rest of the world is now starting to think very differently. China's soft power really does work, not because Beijing is bribing the world, but mainly because in times of crisis, Beijing doesn't seem to abandon the world as much as America and Europe do. That's a very powerful statement there. And actually, in recent weeks, I've been highlighting some different videos, for example, China's role in Asia Pacific, China's role in Latin America, and this is a bigger story that we're talking about is, there really does seem to be a power battle between, who's helping the most countries around the world. Is it going to be America or Western or European countries, or is it going to be China? China's really the new player, but they're making a lot of developments, right? The Belt and Road Initiative has been very successful. There's, dozens and dozens of countries around the world that are partnering with China on this initiative. Tell us a little bit more about that statement.
Yeah, I think we're missing out a little bit on the initiatives. And that's what I said in the beginning, from the bottom up. So it's the people, it's the companies, they're really trying to, pragmatically do business globally and make money, but also to change the world. And in their perspective, it's not so much, it's not only about soft power. It's more about making sure in the Chinese context, you have more friends and more opportunity. And so that gives you more trust in each other, and it can grow things. And so I do believe the real issue is that, and you've seen it with the G7 just lately, and with a lot of topics that you've talked about, is that we're kind of like always behind. China's been doing things, and then we counter that. And in the past, it was the opposite. In the past, we were doing things everywhere, and a lot of programs and helping a lot of countries. And so suddenly it feels like the last decade, we've just lost touch with the Southern Hemisphere, or very much. And of course, China, we say, is benefiting from that, but because we left a void. But for China, I don't think it's just about leaving a void. It's also because they look at it from an opportunity point of view for their population and for everybody in itself. And I'm not just talking about power. For me, it's more about the business, about the growth, about the benefits for the country, about having more wealth in the country. This is what every country wants. And so China has been looking at the Southern Hemisphere I think also because they know where they were 30 years ago, and that was in the same boat. They were actually poor and they had challenges, and they had the West that basically was dictating or telling them a little bit what to buy and how to buy it and at what price. And so they feel more connected to that world that is developing because they've been there 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
And so they're using this as an advantage that they understand what the first needs are. And this is indeed often bridges and hospitals and schools and things that people need in those areas. And that's what they're building. Yes. And so I think we're going to miss out if we don't realize that this is not just about soft power. This is more about how they want to grow as an economy, as a society, as a country, and are looking for friends, are looking for countries that are willing to do business with them, willing to deal with them. That helps both parties. And I think that's where the Southern Hemisphere is now, specifically since the war in Ukraine, is really starting to diverge and think twice. And that doesn't mean they want to support China and not US anymore. Maybe they just want to be neutral. Right. And that's fine too. But somehow there's like this power play that in the media is happening between both. But the reality is that I think China gives them probably more opportunity to stay neutral at this stage than many of the countries think they are. Right. And also many of the countries do. So I think this is very important change. I've always said we shouldn't be worried too much about China. We should be worried about when China wakes up the Southern Hemisphere, because that is happening. And once they wake up, and they are waking up, and it's not just about the bridges and the mining and so on. It's also about the 5G and the software and the enabling of entrepreneurs around the world and trying to help them solve their own problems. I think they're starting to wake up more. And that is something that will change the whole parameters or the way that we think about the world. And so that's maybe the new world that we will look at. But China's is like a catalyst of that new world, not because of soft power, but because they just understand, I think, these countries better than we think so.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, what we also see with China, one of the things that I've highlighted is when China's coming into these countries, almost always they're leaving a tangible asset, right? And that is just so important. And I equate it to, teaching a man to fish. Once you teach him that skill set, he's going to have that skill for the rest of his life. But if you're coming in and you're building roads and airports and infrastructure, you're going to be helping that local community, get connected. And as China is a manufacturer for so many products that we use on a daily basis, why wouldn't you want to, partner with the number one manufacturer in the world and build these economic relationships? And so much of that is, I think China really believes in that global economy, and that really is their primary motivation. Let's build these relationships. Let's increase our commerce. Let's, and do more and more trade with everybody in the world. Ideally we want to have a partnership with every country, because of this global economy that we live in. Pascal, we've had a wonderful chat today. This has been
great,
so interesting to hear your perspective. You've brought in some amazing things. I have one final question, and it's the same question I ask everybody to finish out. What is one thing that you want the world to know about China?
The one thing I would want to know the world about China. That's a big question.
It's a deep question,
because I have so many things I want the world. I wrote 2 books about it. So no, but I think the one thing I would want the world to know about China is that Chinese are dreamers, and they are very hopeful. Yeah, and I think we need to look at that hope and that dreams, which then results in positive stories. And we this is where I think we're missing out on understanding China, is understanding that they are extremely ambitious, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean they want to improve whatever it is, their lives, their family, their environment, the planet, the world. I mean they're very ambitious, and I think we can use that ambition if we work with them. And so for me, what I want the people in the world that don't know China as well to understand is that if we look at their dreams, there's a lot of things that we can learn from a positive side of China. And that's where I would start.
That's a fantastic answer. I love that. And, that is one of the things when you start to live in China and you interact with the locals, there's an amazing energy in China and excitement. You know, the Chinese people are very ambitious, entrepreneurs, hustlers. You know, they really have that culture, and you know, 30 years is a relatively short amount of time, you know, to see this transition in China. And I think that is why so many Chinese are also very proud of being Chinese. They're very proud of their country. They're very proud of where they've come from and where they're going. And I think that's an important thing that many Westerners need to understand as well, is yes, they are going to be very proud of their country because, quite frankly, they've done a lot in the last 30 years, and they have a lot of things to be proud of. Pascal, thank you so much for your time today. Tell everybody, I know that you have a YouTube channel. I'm going to put the links down below. Where can people find your book?
Well, my book can be found on Amazon. I think that's the easiest. Anybody can find it there anywhere in the world, or on my website where I have my own shop where you can buy it as well. So for anything in Europe or Asia, maybe my website is faster in delivery than Amazon, but for the US, I think Amazon is faster.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to put your website and then links to the Amazon for both of your books and all of your information down in the description below for everybody. So if you're interested to learn more about this topic, you know, can we trust China? I invite you all to click down in the links below and go ahead and purchase Pascal's new book. He's done a great job on this. It's been a fantastic read for me. I really enjoyed reading this book. Pascal, thank you so much for your time, and we definitely need to do a follow-up on that. I'm already excited for our next collaboration. We'll definitely have to make you regular on the channel.
Okay, looking forward to that, Cyrus. Thanks a lot for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you for making it to this point in the video, and I hope you enjoyed this two-part series with Pascal as we answered the important question, can we trust China? I hope that these episodes provide some useful information to really help all of us better understand China. As I've said in the beginning, China is incredibly complex, and it really does take a different understanding. Start reading more about China, and let's start learning how to build more bridges and work together. In addition, I want to thank Skillshare for being a longtime partner of this channel and helping me produce the content that we do on a weekly basis. An amazing online learning community with thousands of inspiring courses dedicated to anybody that wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. Over the past few months, I've been personally using Skillshare to improve a variety of different skills. Everything from writing better YouTube scripts to improving my editing, even improving my thumbnail images. And recently I found this course, How to Organize Your Workflow to Maximize Productivity, from Ali Abdaal, one of the most successful YouTubers in the world today. As many of you know, I live a very busy life. I'm a small business owner, a YouTuber, and also a father of 3 children, and learning to maximize my workflow and my creativity has been absolutely vital. Whatever your passion is in life, whether it's photography, graphic design, music, gardening, I guarantee you that there is a suitable course for you on Skillshare. Simply click the link down in the description below and be one of the first 1,000 people to take advantage and claim your 1-month free trial. Everyone, my name is Cyrus Janssen. Thanks for spending time with me today on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in next week's video.